Hi and welcome to this new episode of the State of the Net podcast. I'm Paolo Valdemarin.
And I'm Ewan Semple.
And I really wanted to tell you about a documentary that I watched recently on Netflix about a group of scientists coming from different disciplines, meeting each other, and fun enough, all discovering how their domain has become much bigger than it was before recently and how exciting it is. But I cannot find the documentary on Netflix anymore. So I'll try hard to find it and put it in the episode notes. But I cannot find it anymore. Apparently Netflix pulled it.
Well, that's because that's interesting in itself, isn't it? The fact that the scientists are all, in a way that I find exciting, beginning to, so many of the different sciences are heading in a similar direction, and they're all, in some ways, heading back to truths that have been known for a couple of thousand years in terms of the spiritual traditions. But that whole weakening of the certainty that we've enjoyed for the last, 100 post-Enlightenment years, more than that, that we're on this scientific path and we will find all the truths, and once we've got all the answers, life will get easier. And then you can't find the bloody thing on Netflix. It's
But and that was the brilliant part of this documentary, was how they all come from different. So you had biologists and physicists and psychologists, and they all meet each other, and you have couples. So one goes to see the other and learn about their domain, and what is common between all these different disciplines is that recently, in the last 10 or 20 years, there have been breakthroughs that basically reveal the fact that they know so little about it. Mm-hmm. And what I thought it was interesting, probably, they hadn't been very well selected, is how all of them found so exciting the fact that we know so little.
Yeah.
And I guess that the other thing that I wanted to notice is how documentaries are becoming almost a new media. This is actually, I'm going to do a product placement now. At State of the Net this year, Hossein Direction mentioned the fact that documentaries are becoming a new type of media. If you want to publish an idea, a documentary on Netflix or one of the other platforms has become a new way of publishing science, which I'm watching a lot of documentaries, but I had not realized until I heard that on the stage.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I had a meeting this week with somebody who works for one of the big conventional media organisations, and not my own former employer, I should hasten to add. And we were talking about the role of the news journalists and the media generally. And he was optimistic about an increasing appetite for subscription. And, the whole thing about micropayments has rattled around the internet since it started, and we've never really cracked it. But I think the appetite for documentaries, the appetite for podcasts. I was listening to a podcast with Joe Rogan and Neil deGrasse Tyson, the physicist, who has his own podcast, and he was saying how much of an appetite there appears to be for good, thoughtful science podcasts. And, this is sort of, in a way, what some of us have been saying all along, that once people get over the fun of sharing pictures of cats, there's still a potential for us to use the internet for really worthwhile stuff. And if we start finding new means to access clever people through their own documentaries or podcasts or whatever, then ultimately that's a good thing. And if you combine that with this easing of the certainty that we've got all the answers, that's partly why I remain optimistic about all of this. And it sort of relates to an article that Dennis Howlett wrote recently, which he referenced me several times, so thanks for that, Dennis, but about the shifting nature of the workplace and the fact that he referred to a bottom-up revolution, which I'm not sure is a good way of talking about it, because it sort of implies hierarchy still in a sort of revolutionary field that I don't think is appropriate. But I prefer Stowe Boyd's phrase edgelings to describe the fact that the network, the collective intelligence, is going faster than the top and the middle. And the top and the middle aren't very used to dealing with that. And I think these are all symptoms of the same sort of trend, that as people mature in their use of the technologies, as they realise the consequences of sharing rubbish and the polarisation that that can cause, again, I'm optimistic that we will work out how to do this to our best advantage. And I think these are all signs of the same thing.
Yeah, it's actually going back for a second to documentaries. Another very good documentary I watched is the new Ken Burns documentary about the Vietnam War, which is also on Netflix, and it's 10 episodes, it's 17 hours of history, and it's so interesting, so good. And one of the interesting aspects is seeing how the media and the public reacted to the news about the Vietnam War, and how probably during those years between during the 60s, you had this first evolution of going from a very top-down approach to news, where everything was very institutionalized, to these first journalists that start trying to tell a slightly different angle for the story, and how a larger and larger group of American population and probably worldwide population started reacting to what was mainstream and trying to find other sources and trying to, in a way, starting to be mature, not just being on the receiving part, but being critical and trying to find alternatives. And probably if we look at what we can do today with on the internet, it's just a much more powerful version of that, and of course with also a lot of more responsibility and with a lot of more challenges that we're all seeing.
Yeah, and as you rightly said, just another iteration in the same shift, if you like. And again, in this conversation with the chap from the news group, we were talking about blockchain in that context as well, and the fact that they were looking into blockchains as a way of accrediting news sources or information sources, or I've heard this talked about before, even just in terms of individual identity, but also credibility and peer accreditation rather than centralized institutional accreditation. I was saying to him that I, for many years, have talked about the idea of podcasting for journalism, where I don't want to buy an album anymore because I'm wary of the 3 rubbish tracks that get put in with the ones that I actually want. And I now see newspapers in much the same way. There's maybe 2 or 3 articles that I really want to will get value from, and then an awful lot of other stuff that I don't. And in many ways, RSS was always our means of achieving that playlist of stories or journalists or whatever. And I still maintain an RSS reader, and I still manage the feeds so that I get I think a quality feed of people finding out stuff that matters. And so I think that the need to find other ways of navigating our way to, and I'm always pause before I say this, the truth, whatever the hell that means, is again part of the learning process. And if, as you say, documentaries are becoming an increasingly important part of that, then that's a great thing.
I guess that the real challenge is how you strike the right balance between, moving into an echo chamber where you only see what you want to see, and on the other end of the spectrum, being completely passive. Finding a way to be your own DJ and at the same time allowing for serendipity, allowing for random things. I mean, sometimes there was a song on that album that you would not have bought but was good.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's striking the balance there. I think it's something that, personally, I think that I'm struggling to achieve right now, and I've been doing this for many years, and I think it will take some time before it goes really mainstream.
And it comes and goes, doesn't it? I mean, I think I would describe it slightly differently from the way you just did. I don't think it's quite as polarized as that. It's not all or nothing, in the sense that you don't need, ending up in an echo chamber is a choice, and always has been. You could choose to keep the company of certain people. You could choose to read the Telegraph or the Guardian. In some ways it's not a result of the internet, the ability to only be listening to views that you agree with. But that's a slightly different thing from the opportunity for serendipity and for discovery beyond your actual experience. I think that they're two different things. And certainly that was always the premise of the BBC's Inform, Educate and Entertain, which at its worst could become knowing what was good for people, but at its best was that stretching people into areas they might not otherwise discover. And I think you're right in the sense that it's not in our own gift necessarily. I sometimes go off-piste, as I call it. I'll just, rather than just following my normal well-worn paths to the same people, I'll just start randomly surfing around the internet and following links and following my nose and just getting a better sense of what's out there and what I'm missing and what might be becoming an echo chamber. But I think you're right. It's a set of skills that some of us have been trying to refine for a long time. Most people haven't really had the chance or the need to discover yet. And I think are skills that we could be teaching. We could be and should be teaching in schools. How to find and verify quality information.
Oh, but even I think that even more simply how to use the tools. I think that they should teach in school how to use Facebook or any other social media tool. Is how you can fine tune your. Probably you don't need to, because kids in school are actually much smarter than what we admit. They should actually teach to adults how to use Facebook. But for example, recently I've noticed that I have started unfollowing some people on Facebook because I just started to find the situation in Italy right now, politically speaking, is say not particularly happy if you happen to be especially if you happen to be on one side, which is the side of the intelligent people. And
not that you're biased.
Not at all. But I started to find my Facebook quite depressing, because most of the news I was getting, it's even worse than Trump. And so I literally started unfollowing people that were just being negative. And look, it's not like I follow the news. I know what's going on, and I understand the frustration, but I don't need that much frustration in my life.
No, and I think that's perfectly legitimate. I've done the same over the years, and it's not just because I disagree with them, and it's not that I'm wanting to have a placid and unperturbed existence online. It's just that if your overall experience is becoming sufficiently negative, then it's entirely up to you to do something about it, And even down to it's the nature of the engagements as well. I've unfriended a couple of folks who, I've known for a long time, but who I was ending up sort of almost being nervous about writing a post because I was waiting for them to jump down my throat, and you can't do that. I couldn't continue like that. So you can have a disagreement, and I'm very happy. I love it when we have disagreements on my Facebook thread and people have different perspectives from my own. But if all I'm having is somebody ranting at me, very often because they haven't read the bloody post in the first place, it gets irritating. So again, that's interesting, isn't it? How that motivation to manage your ecology, to maintain your own sanity, its quality, avoid the risk of echo chambers. It's a whole new set of skills, isn't it? Because we've kind of passively outsourced that to the media for most of our lives.
But exactly. But what I think is interesting is actually that we have plenty of tools to do that, and I think that. But I think that most people don't do that. I think that most people do not fine tune their stream. They just like shit and they get it, and I mean, I think there is plenty of people that actually walk away from some social media channels because they cannot be bothered to optimize it for them, and then they basically say, oh, I on Facebook or name any other social media channel, say, there is only cats and stupid things, and you said, well, because you're just following idiots.
That's your friends you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is not Facebook. The problem is your friends, or the problem is who you selected as your friends.
Well, I had the two extremes in the same conversation the other day there, where this chap I was speaking to started off having a rant about, this. He just basically mouthed the stereotypical media, Facebook's, social media's gone toxic, it's all a mess, blah, blah, blah. And then started giving me examples of how it had been used really powerfully by people he knew. And it just didn't seem to strike him that these were the same thing that he was talking about, basically. And I think, I almost have a feeling that of them letting the rest of us down if they walk away. The thing won't improve if it doesn't have a robust exchange of different views in it.
No, actually, that is the fact. I mean, very often I have friends who stopped using Facebook, and to be honest, I'm sad. I mean, I was happier when they were on Facebook because because I like them and I like what they were sharing. I was feeling their frustration. I was feeling the fact that they were not happy.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be dismissive of it. Yeah.
And I know, and by all means, I mean, if that is making you unhappy, then probably it's what you should do. But I always have the feeling said, well, maybe you're not doing it right. Maybe you should find a better way to deal with this, because walking away from it is not really. Because, I mean, the point is, you walk away from social media today, and what do? I mean, you start aggregating feeds again. I mean, or you watch TV, or you just shut yourself in a room and don't. I mean,
I thought you might read a book, Paolo.
No, look, I do read books, and I listen to audiobooks. But the funny thing is that what book do I read are actually books that I find through social media.
Totally, I say the same.
I listen to podcasts, and I find podcasts through social media. Between watching TV, documentaries, podcasts, audiobooks, printed books, I think that these days my media diet is as rich as it has ever been.
I'm the same. I say the same to people. That the quality and the relevance and the fun, frankly, that I get from incoming sources has never been better.
Also because the quality is definitely increasing. I mean, you have more and more. As we were saying earlier about documentaries, I mean, the Vietnam documentary it cost $30 million or something like that. It's some huge investment, and it's very good quality television, or maybe it's not even television anymore. It's very good quality PBS or Netflix.
Well, that's the trouble. We sort of don't have a word for it, do we? Because we still label the things by the media that they used to most commonly be delivered on.
No, that's why, in a way, what I find novel about these documentaries is that they're not television anymore. They are freed from television. So I can share with you a link to a documentary.
Yes.
Documentaries did exist 10 years ago, but I couldn't give you a link to a documentary. And this make them part of the general media diet.
Yeah, so that was the gist of this.
If only I can find a bloody thing.
But yeah, so that's what I think broadcasters just don't get because of their name. They're still broadcasters. But I think we need people who are good at telling stories, who have the money to tell stories well, which obviously these things can cost a lot of money. They don't need to, but they can. And I also think, in the same way as I say with professional communicators in a corporate environment, that rather than doing it for me, it would be great if they helped me to do it better myself. And I think broadcasters could have a huge impact by making their content, and this chap and I talked about content, and Hallie Suit's phrase about content is a pimp's word. And content is a problematic word because it tends to mean a thing, an object that you kind of hurl at other people. But I think creating content in a context of creating stimulus for interesting conversations, was it the social object that Hugh used to talk about, Hugh MacLeod? I think broadcasters and the media their intentions matter. And if they could make more content that was a stimulus for grown-up conversations, that would be great.
But I think that I do think that it is happening. I mean, if you look at, for example, Netflix, I mean, they are spending a lot of money producing content, and it is not just a TV show. I mean, many of these documentaries are actually Netflix productions.
Yeah.
Now they're saying that Apple is starting their own content play, and if there is one company with enough money, that's them. The other day we were playing with friends, and we noticed how if we humans decide to sell Apple and just share the money that we get between all of us, 7.5 billion humans on the planet, we all get, each one of us get $130. I mean, basically, we all get an Apple TV.
But who would we sell it to?
I don't know, Martians? Elon Musk?
Yeah, well, yeah. It is crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
But it gives you the idea of
the scale,
how much $1 trillion is. But I mean, all these companies. I mean, and I think there are others that are realizing that there is a whole new game, and that there is plenty of space for niches. There is plenty of space to make the funky little documentary that. It will never be mainstream, but if you have a distribution channel as big as Netflix, it's big enough.
So this is interesting because this sort of relates back to that article that Dennis wrote and the idea of edgelings and the role of managers in organisations and the role of gatekeepers in any context. And the challenge, I think, at the moment for people who are trying to make interesting, relevant stuff is they either sort of go their own way and some of them can be very successful. Some of the podcasts become huge without any support from existing media companies. But certainly telly and investigative journalism still costs money. And you end up supping with the devil, as it were, trying to find funding and resource from existing media companies. And of course, you then get sucked into their W1A world of politics and bias and not always making the right decisions. So I think at the moment we've got this kind of like mixed economy where you still, and this is where Netflix are really interesting, and I'd be fascinated to sort of know more about how they organise themselves and how they run themselves. But certainly the existing media companies, I think, have got too much legacy attitude and assumptions about their role that can sometimes make it hard for the ecosystem to develop around them.
Yeah, well, I think that the kind of mainstream media companies, on one side, they're probably still connected to an old economic. I mean, again, we're talking about subscription in the case of Netflix versus other type of business models, and I think that the whole subscription model is so interesting. I mean, I'm working with a company producing a daily news briefing, and it's subscription based. It costs very little. It costs like €2 a month or something like that, and they're being very successful and very happy, and they're growing. We're building new platform, new features, and I find it is so interesting how you can have a sustainable journalistic effort, which is completely disintermediated. So it's as simple as a journalist, I will prepare your daily briefing, and you give me a little bit of money. There is no advertising, there is no social media, there is no other things in the middle. And I think that this also offer a very clear deal between the reader and whoever is creating. And I appreciate that. I mean, they are the type of work that they do can be done in these terms. Of course, if you need to send somebody on the other side of the planet, you need to have a different model. But
but also I think, another story I was hearing recently was about AI being used to not only identify sources of information, but to also, to some extent, fact check and, critique those sources, and then assemble stories. And that's a technology that's getting increasingly smart. And I compare that, frankly, to some of the journalists I've known over the years who weren't that smart, who were just feeding the beast with content. And, the media companies, I hope none of my former friends are listening, or former colleagues are listening to this, because, I think news businesses could save huge amounts of money if they just stopped doing the noise, got some machines to do the noise, and spent the money on the signal. But I don't think any of them have got the guts to do that, frankly.
Well, it's if you think about the news, think about an AI big enough, smart enough to be able to follow a lot of channels. It started to become the case where, the example that I just made, which is a typical example of any news organization, said, well, but if you need to send somebody over there to figure out the news, that's expensive. Mm-hmm. Saying, yeah, but probably there is somebody over there already figuring it out. Maybe we don't need to send somebody. Yeah. Maybe we just have to have a system which is smart enough to find that information and make it accessible to me. Yeah. So probably the mistake that I was making is trying again to apply an old model to a new system, and the new system is really completely different and allows for things that we haven't imagined yet, probably.
Yes, and that's I think a challenge that's affecting all sorts of industries, that we're all increasingly aware that our old assumptions are becoming weaker, our old ways of doing things are becoming less effective, but the kind of leap into the dark to what's coming next feels like a big leap still, doesn't it?
Well, I guess everybody clings on what they know because jumping in the dark void is scary, and I also think that it is interesting the fact that because it is scary, we probably imagine things that will never happen. For sure. While there are, something that I was thinking about as we were discussing is that probably one of the most interesting impact of AI that we are already seeing without realizing is the quality of translation. Mm-hmm. The fact that languages are becoming less and less of a barrier. Yes. So there was a very interesting article about the World Cup in Russia, and it was said how it was the first time that you had a major event where people were actually interacting using real-time translation on their phone. and how people went there, they ate food, they met friends, they were dating women, and everything worked because they could communicate, because it was the first time the translation was good enough to be able to support this kind of interaction.
Fantastic.
And if you think about it, how much of news reporting is about sending somebody to report on the news, and where the talent that this person have is not so much finding the news, it's just that they speak your language. But how far are we from the point where we can understand every language and every person on the planet? So we don't need to send somebody who speaks our language. We can just communicate with somebody. We can just understand an article, or probably at some point even a newscast from another country. But then, have you seen how good? Have you seen how good subtitling is on YouTube? Automatic subtitling.
Well, funnily enough, my mum was just ranting about how bad the subtitling is on the BBC just yesterday. But yes,
I was amazed. Actually, the video that we did together a few months ago in Shoreditch, I uploaded the video of you speaking for 20 minutes and had YouTube do the automatic subtitling.
Wow.
probably we have to make 10 correction in 20 minutes.
Goodness me.
It was, and I'm not even mentioning accents.
So that would have passed the Rab C. Nisbet test then.
I think that you will be able to use a voice control elevator.
And maybe if I just carry one of these devices when I'm with other people, and then they'll understand what I'm meant to be saying. That'd be very useful.
You will be wearing a little subtitle device just hanging under your face. And as you're talking, subtitles will appear for others.
Well, that's right.
That would be brilliant. I mean, I think the technology to do that is almost there.
But so going back to your point about if we just had access to a translated feed from countries or whatever, it surfaces the fact that so much of the news business is about filtering, either conscious or unconscious bias as well, in the sense that, I'm very aware that if I've ever ended up on the news, on the telly or the radio, it's probably because I was the first person on the person's contact list who answered the phone. And there's very often not much more critical thinking goes into it than that. And, if you stick a foreign journalist, they all have to go to a country for the first time. And if you've got a country that's become a origin of a news story and there's nobody who's been there before, and suddenly you get somebody plonked in there having to desperately find out, and they're skilled at it, that's what they get trained in, and they're good at finding out who's telling the truth and who's worth talking to and who's not, but it's still a very flawed process. But that process is still arguably, discuss, better or more likely to get something than simply listening to the unconstrained, unfiltered noise that's being generated locally.
Yeah, again, it's I think that it is about finding and striking the right balance. And that could be again a case where a well-trained, your own well-trained AI one day you'll be able to say, okay, find me a point of view on this, and you'll be able to get it immediately.
Or even stretch my thinking on this, Find me somebody credible who'll make me think harder about this topic or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, okay, and if you think about it, Did you read how the thing the news came out this week? Facebook is actually, they have a credibility index not only on news sources but on users. Mm-hmm. And of course, I mean,
that's what the blog roll used to be in the old days, wasn't it? Right?
But exactly, but I think that they, in their case, they're using this to, find in an easier way sources that are somehow skewed or they're trying to play the game. If you have a user who constantly is sharing news that are later proven to be fake, by observing that user, you will probably find more fake news.
But that's the same sort of algorithm. But the worrying, I mean, it's funny, even through that description, I was getting excited and thinking, gosh, it's amazing they don't do more than they do already. But then I was also thinking, but that's the trouble, that type of an algorithm about the value of what somebody is or isn't saying can then be used to manage society. And that then gets problematic.
Oh, well, but, I think that the moment you have algorithms that allow you to understand people and to decide who is better and who is worse, you have a very powerful tool.
And who gets to decide that algorithm? That's the issue. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that the interesting thing about the algorithm is that it could be decided in a collective way. I mean, we can all together decide something. And again, it's probably not a positive or negative things. And of course, there are many, many facets. So what is meaningful for me might not be meaningful for you. But what I think is interesting is that we could create a machine that is much more optimized to find and help understanding things, as opposed to a machine that we have now, which is built to collect information and it's extremely redundant and wasteful. It's every time I see any major news event, and you have all the TV crews in front of it. And every TV crew, there is a cameraman and then there's a journalist, and they're all speaking into the camera and, with the same thing.
And very often from different bits of the same organisation in the case of the BBC, but yes.
But the question is, why there are so many? I mean, it's the same. They're all telling the same story. They're not. I mean, let's be honest. They're not giving us different angles of the same story. They're all reporting exactly the same thing.
Well, that's going back to my point about the inefficiency possibly being the strength, that they do come back. The Telegraph will tell a story very differently from the Guardian.
When they will write the article,
from whatever,
When they will write the article, yes. When they're standing under the rain, telling you the real-time news, I think they are reporting pretty much exactly the same thing. I think that this is still pieces of old newscast media where you had to send somebody, and that is how it used to work, and that's how it's still working.
I mean, this is making me think again of that article that I know I keep referring to, but the ideology of algorithms, where at the end of that, it's one of these daft ideas that when you say it at the time, you could have dismissed, but I could see this becoming a thing in 10 years or so, where I suggest that we could get the AI to write our next ism. If capitalism and socialism are running out of steam and out of date, then get AI to watch our behaviours, watch what causes distress and friction. Don't remove it altogether because you want a bit of a stretch. You don't want to have a completely placid, easy, boring life. But we could all just agree to sign up for whatever rules the AI comes up with. And, it's not that daft an idea because our current methods of trying to achieve the same thing are increasingly flawed.
Yeah, exactly. And on that note, I think we can wrap up today's episode and start saying goodbye.
And if you want to get a hold of us, where can people find you, Paolo?
You can find links to all my channels on my personal website, which is Paolo Valde. That is PAOLOVAL.de. And where they can find you? And
they can find me at ewansample.com. And as ever, we would be very grateful if people can review the podcast on iTunes, which seems to be a good way to get more people paying attention to it.
Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and see you soon.
Goodbye.